Okay, I wrote about this in the last section of my book, Uncovering Missing Secrets of Magnetism. Available free online. I want to show you, for the first time ever, except for my book, the missing secret of light. I've known about this for 5+ years now, but now, due to experiments, other people's inventions and patents, and recent discoveries, the evidence has become absolutely overwhelming. I should have written about this 5 years ago, but you're the first to see it in my book. This is the missing nature of light. It explains the photoelectric effect, the Faraday effect, the wave-particle duality nonsense of the cult of quantum. This explains everything about light. See, light, remember Oliver Heaviside created the coaxial cable. The missing secret of light is that it is not electromagnetic. It is, but it has a z-axis radial dielectric component at which it is pulsed in proportion to the wavelength and the frequency of the light. This is the explanation for the correct observations, the correct calculations, but the wrong conclusions, as is so typical of science. It does experiments and it retests and it retests and it gets results, but it draws the wrong conclusions. This explains why light can propagate over immense distances in space and still hold its structure. This explains why magnetism deflects light, because it has a z-axis radial dielectric component. This explains absolutely everything about light. The cult of quantum was bred out of the misunderstanding of light. Light is not electromagnetic. It is dielectro-electromagnetic, or dielectromagnetic. I like to call it dielectromagnetism. You have the idiot Einstein who said, "We are forced with a new kind of difficulty. We have two contradictory pictures of reality. Separately, neither pertain nor way fully explains light phenomena, but together they do." In other words, what we have is a wave-particle duality here. That was my poor impression of German. Every point, doesn't matter if it's linear polarization or circular polarization, this is the accurate geometry of light. This explains why shorter wavelength, higher frequency light carries more conductivity in the photoelectric effect. The photon is just a misunderstanding of the dielectric pulse in electromagnetism. You can call light quasi-matter. Magnetism deflects dielectricity. Recent inventions and being able to bend light using purely centrifugal magnetic fields, either simplex permanent magnets or electromagnets. Electricity cannot exist on its own within magnetism. The structure makes this impossible. Einstein's premise that, we have two contradictory pictures of reality. Separately, neither particle nor wave fully explains light phenomena, but together they do. Well, this is incorrect. Let's read from Dr. Oleg Defunchenko's work. Multiple PhDs, well-acclaimed scientist. His book is mostly formulas. But let's quote him here from Maxwell, Faraday, and the Heaviside, the rest. "But here we have seen neither Maxwell's equations nor their solutions indicate an existence of a causal link between electric and magnetic fields. Therefore, we must conclude that an electromagnetic field is a dual entity always having an electric and magnetic component simultaneously created by their common sources, time variable electrical charges and currents." Unfortunately, Dr. Oleg Defunchenko's math is unapproachable. Nobody, in doing deep searches, nobody's ever said anything he said here or his other books are wrong, but he never comes to the last 10% of the conclusion of the implications of his formulas. In other words, it appears that according to equation 1.5.1, there exists a sourceless electromagnetic field that can exist sourceless electromagnetic fields, whereas according to equation 528, such fields are impossible. Let's read just a little bit further. According to these equations, in time-variable systems, electric and magnetic fields are always created simultaneously because they have a common causative source. That source is dielectricity. That is the missing component of light. Okay? Once created, the two fields coexist from then on without any effect upon each other. Therefore, electromagnetic induction as a phenomena in which one of the two fields creates the other, or a self-induction, that's quantum BS's explanation for light propagation, is the magnetic induces the electric and the electric induces the magnetic. Well, we know for absolute fact that phi times psi equals electrification. Electricity on its own cannot exist. It is the product of dielectricity and magnetism. We know this. So electromagnetism cannot exist as the entity is currently described. It has to have a z-axis radial dielectric component, which, by the way, explains the photoelectric effect, which, by the way, explains the Faraday effect, which, by the way, explains away the wave-particle duality, which I'll show you here in a second. But if the two fields are created simultaneously and coexist from then on as a dual entity, then our concept of understanding electromagnetic induction requires a thorough re-examination. As we see, James Clerk Maxwell, too, considered electromagnetic induction as a phenomenon in which a current, i.e. an electromotive force, EMF, induced in a circuit, but not as a phenomenon in which a changing magnetic field causes an electrical field. He clearly said that the induced electromotive force is measured by, but not caused by, the changing magnetic field. Just as Faraday, he made no allusions to any causal link between the magnetic and electric fields. Well, gee, what's the implication of that? I wish Dr. Oleg wasn't dead. We'd be able to talk to him. Before I erase this, let's take a quick look at this again. Here is a shorter wavelength, higher frequency. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 dielectric pulses. 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, somehow that makes sense. It explains away the wave-particle duality, explains the Faraday effect, it explains the photoelectric effect. So what you're saying is that the shorter wavelength and the higher frequencies has higher dielectric capacitance, and therefore that is why gamma and X-ray contain more kinetic energy, and which also explains deflection of shorter wavelength and higher frequency in prisms and glass and plastic when we use a prism to break up regular RGB light or break up sunlight. Why, yes, it does that way. It seems to make sense. Let's erase this and let's take a look. Let's take a look. One thing really quick here. Let's look at our chart again. Magnetism, dielectricity, electricity, which is the production of phi times psi equals electrification. Okay, so that's how we get electricity. So electricity cannot exist on its own as self-propagated from Dr. Olav Defonchenko's formulas, and also from Maxwell and from Faraday. Here we have gravity and mass. So, now that we know the nature of light, let's take a look at what light is. Dielectricity. These are the two co-principles of the universe. Magnetism is radiation, is discharge, it is spatial. Electricity has a transverse component. Oh, well, we know light has a transverse component. It's either linear or circular polarized. So, what's the difference? Down here we have gravity, mass. So these are two co-principles of the universe as we talked about in previous videos. Dielectricity and magnetism. So let's take a look at light. Here we have light. Dielectric radial, transverse electrical, transverse magnetic. Now let's take a look at gravity mass. Oh, you mean you can explain it like a 10-year-old? 10-year-olds can have 10-year-old explanations, but it takes wisdom to be able to give you an accurate, not description, but explanation that a 10-year-old can understand. So here we have gravity mass, and here we have light. For lack of a better term, we could call light quasi-matter. Oh, gee, well that kind of explains the photoelectric effect, and that completely explains the wave-particle duality bullshit that all of quantum is based upon. So let's take a look at our transverse wave here. We know this is our dielectric pulse, dependent upon the wavelength and the frequency. Now let's take a look at one section of that electromagnetic pulse, which now we know is dielectromagnetic, not electromagnetic. Oh my God, what does that look like? Here we have a dielectric pulse. We know the nucleus is extremely powerful in dielectricity, and it creates electrical discharges, and it contains within it magnetism. Oh, gee, that kind of looks like an atom. Here we take one section of electromagnetism. This is where the wave-particle duality BS comes from. It's not understanding that light, EM, has a z-axis radial dielectric component. We know for a fact that strong magnetic fields deflect light. Well, how is that possible? Well, because as we know from magnetism, in a conjugate binding system, dielectricity and magnetism are always moving 180 degrees opposite from each other. Here we have our magnet, here we have our dielectric inertial plane, here we have our centrifugal magnetism, here we have our centripetal magnetism, centrifugal, centripetal, centrifugal, centripetal, centrifugal, centripetal. Gee, nature's kind of simple. We don't have to deal with all this quantum bullshit. This kind of makes sense. We've taken all sorts of different perplexities and you've put them into something really, really simple. So you have a dielectric media like a glass or plastic prism. You get greater deflection off the shorter wavelength, higher frequencies. So this would be our blue and our red. Gee, I wonder why that would be. Well, that's because red has lower wavelength and longer frequency. There are fewer dielectric pulses. So let's take a look now at dielectric pulse in light. Here we have this, 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 this. Let's just say this is gamma or X-ray, for example. And let's just say this is infrared. I should have spaced that out better. Let's see here now. Let's see if this is logical, if it makes sense. Z-axis radial dielectric pulse, 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 pulse. Here we have oh my God, look at that. The shorter wavelength, the higher frequency. And it's all these dielectric pulses. Remember, dielectricity works in a conjugate nature to magnetism. The more space you have, the more magnetism you have. The smaller the space you have, the more dielectricity you have. This is the counterspatial centripetal nature of dielectricity or electrostatics. Well, my God, that explains magnetic deflection of light. That explains prisms. It explains that white light, for lack of a better term, is quasi-matter. Well, what do you mean what quasi-matter is? Well, even the cult of quantum agrees, and the idiot Einstein, who sent us all down this road of quantum insanity. Now, there is no strong nuclear force. The strong nuclear force is dielectricity. The weak nuclear force doesn't exist either. That is a misunderstanding of spin, of the nucleus and the interaction of charge and discharge. Over here we have magnetism, down here we have gravity mass, and up here we have electricity. So we know that every particle in the universe, in the interatomic, as from previous videos, has enormous amounts of dielectricity and magnetism driving the system, causing charge and discharge from the superluminal spinning nucleus of every atom, whether it's stable or not. So here we have matter, mass, gravity. What do you mean by quasi-matter? What sort of new age white light nonsense BS are you talking about? Well, I have nothing to do with white light BS nonsense. Only logic. Platonic, simple, retroductive logic. What's this? Oh, look at that. Radial dielectric with transverse electricity and transverse magnetism. Radial dielectric pulsed along the transverse wavelength and frequency of the light. You can call this QM, quasi-matter, or light. It is not electromagnetic, it is dielectromagnetic. Oh, gee, this makes a lot of sense. So we don't have to deal with wave-particle duality bullshit anymore. We can understand the Faraday effect. We can understand the photoelectric effect is just a misunderstanding that the shorter the wavelength and the higher the frequency, the more the dielectric pulses we have, resulting to the shorter wavelength, higher frequency. Yes, Bobby, that is correct. Here we have infrared. We get no results out of that using the photoelectric effect demonstration. Why is that? Because there's very little dielectric capacitance within the infrared long wave, the longer wave, lower frequencies. Oh, why do we get such charge and zapping a anode and cathode inside a vacuum tube and getting charge from high frequency short wavelength electromagnetism? Well, Bobby, it's not electromagnetic, it's dielectromagnetic. What that means is that the shorter wavelength, higher frequency has more dielectric pulses and therefore contains more z-axis radial dielectric pulses along the light. So what is light? Light is not EM. Electromagnetism cannot exist as a structure. The notion of self-induction, the electrical is inducing the magnetic and the magnetic inducing the electrical, is impossible. We know that electricity is the product of magnetism and dielectricity. Here we have Q, Planck, electrification. Electromagnetism is impossible. Oh, where does the wave-particle duality nonsense come from again? Well, I don't really understand that. You talked about it. Well, here we go. Let's take one section here. This is where the wave-particle duality comes from. This is why light acts like both a particle and a wave. Well, what does that mean? Well, here we have our dielectricity acting like a particle, the nucleus. Here we have our transverse waves of electricity and magnetism. Why, my God, that kind of looks like a hydrogen atom, except it's electromagnetic with a dielectric pulse, which acts like mass. Oh, well, we kind of forgot about that from our earlier video, that dielectricity terminates into, in stellar creations, the creation of matter mass. Well, that kind of makes sense. Well, Mother Nature's been screaming at you the whole time, but you're never listening to her. Well, what does that mean? Well, have you ever dropped a rock into a pond? Yeah, well, what does that mean? Let's see, what happens when you do that and you watch it in slow motion? You kind of get this number. A little droplet of water comes up. Here we have our waves, our ripples. Should be our electromagnetic ripples. And here we have our little droplet of water that comes out resultant to those waves. Yeah, I've seen that before. You know, you drop a rock or something in a pond and a little drop of water comes up resultant to that. Well, let's turn that on its side. Oh, I kind of think I see where you're going with this. Oh, okay. I think I understand. It's making more sense to me now. Let's just turn those wave droplets sideways. Oh, we know these are the waves, and these are the little droplets. Oh, so what you're saying is that's like electromagnetism. Nature's been screaming at you the whole time that this is how she creates light. Yes, Bobby, that's correct. That's what light is. Each individual section acts like a particle because it has dielectricity and transverse magnetism. Oh my God, that just makes so much sense. Why didn't they teach me this sort of shit in school? You know, I mean, it's just so logical, sensible. It explains wave-particle duality, explains the Faraday effect. It explains the photoelectric effect. It explains why Oliver Heaviside created this nifty little invention way back when. What's that little invention? Oh, it's the coaxial cable. Oh, yes, I've heard about that stuff. Yeah, although Heaviside never mentioned this was the secret nature of light, but he just knew that conduction worked this way. So if electromagnetism was purely electromagnetic, you wouldn't need the center radial conductor and coax cable, would you? No, you wouldn't. So, why are you able to transmit electromagnetic symbol best through, as Oliver Heaviside created it, and Oliver Heaviside despised quantum, by the way. Why did Oliver Heaviside invent the coaxial cable? Did he ever mention the secret geometry of light? No, but he seemed to kind of infer that he understood that that's the best way you could get a transmission line. why light is able to propagate over immense distances in space? And does it explain why gravity distorts light? Yes, it does. Why? Well, because gravity distorts dielectricity, because dielectricity terminates into the creation of mass matter. Over here we have dielectricity, here we have magnetism. Everything over here is spatial, is radiation. Magnetism is discharge. Okay, here we have gravity, mass. Up here we have electricity. We know that electricity cannot exist on its own. It's impossible. Electricity is the component of magnetism and dielectricity. 5 times psi equals Q the Planck. So here we have matter. And here we have what I call quasi-matter. QM. What's that mean? It means nothing. It means this is light. Transverse magnetic, transverse electrical, radial dielectric. Oh my God! I understand what light is now. Light is an electromagnetic. Oh, that's correct. Yes. So this explains why prisms warp light at different frequencies. This explains magnetism deflecting light. This explains away the photoelectric effect's wrong conclusions. This explains the wave-particle duality perfectly. Einstein was wrong. Einstein said, well, you know, we have a difficulty. We have two contradictory pictures of reality. Separated neither particle nor wave fully explains the light phenomena, but together they do. Well, no, Einstein, you mental midget. You half-wit moron. This is light. It has a z-axis radial dielectric component. Shorter wavelength, higher frequency, more dielectric pulse, more energy, or what you know as EV. Oh, so that is why high frequency, short wavelength, gamma and X-rays destroys tissue and is very destructive? That's right. These transverse electrical magnetic waves are the cage for the dielectric kinetic energy that is delivered to the system. Oh, thank you so much. Yes. Now you understand the wave-particle duality. Here we have our waves. Here is the confusion of the particle. Oh, that looks just like an atom. It has electrical and magnetic components, and here we have a nucleus, a dielectric pulse. The wave-particle duality has been solved. That's right, Einstein, you demented mental midget. You didn't understand light. You based an entire religion, an entire cult, upon wave-particle duality nonsense because you did not understand Heaviside, Tesla, Faraday, or Maxwell. What was Einstein asked? Someone asked Einstein once, someone asked Einstein, what does it feel like to be a genius, Mr. Einstein? And Einstein says, I don't know. You will have to go ask Mr. Tesla. Thanks for watching.